Hello and welcome to Boxing Tonight's Mirror Fighting's preview of this evening's fights. And we have a huge heavyweight bout to preview. And I'm not yet anyway, talking about Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. We are, of course, talking about Daniel Dubois and Joe Joyce, a huge heavyweight clash with ramifications really for world title fights next year. I'm Martin Dorman, joined by Rich Jones. Please do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. So it was scheduled for April, then July, then October. Now we're almost in December, but finally we have it. Daniel Dubois, Joe Joyce. Very intriguing clash. Rich, and really we should give credit to both men, but possibly particularly Joe Joyce for taking the fight in the first place. You know, he's 35. He could probably have avoided it and taking a different route, perhaps, to a world title shot. But he's taking on a man 13 years his junior. And credit especially to both of them for taking it in the pandemic with a pay cut.
Yeah, absolutely. You sense it's going to be the sort that whoever loses is probably going to look back in a few years and go, why on earth did I do that? Why didn't I just hold it out? But yeah, like you say, credit to both of them for taking the fight. I think, like you say, it's a bigger thing for Joe Joyce because, you know, obviously Dubois will be looking for the win, but if he doesn't win, he's got time on his side. He's got plenty of time to rebuild. Whereas for Joe Joyce, it's a real sort of, it's going to be really tough for him to sort of rebuild and come back at the age he is if he doesn't win tonight. So, yeah, it's great for boxing that they've both taken the fight. It's great for boxing that we're finally getting to see it. And I think that the fact that after all these delays and all this time talking about it, I'm still feeling as excited as I am for it tonight. I think that's a testament to, you know, just how good a fight this is, really. So, yeah, we'll see what happens when the bell rings.
It's certainly been talked about for a long, long time. And when it was initially made, I'm sure the bookmakers regarded it as a 50-50 fight. That's no longer the case now. Daniel Dubois considerably odds on. But let's take Daniel Dubois first. You can't fault his record, taking the distance once by Kevin Johnson, but he could take, I think, just about anybody the distance. Even now, he hasn't put a foot wrong, really. He clearly got power in both hands, you know, spectacular knockouts. But this is a considerable step up for him. He hasn't faced anybody of Joe Joyce's caliber yet.
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'm all in on Daniel Dubois. I think he's an absolutely massive, massive talent. I think he's got what it takes to go all the way, really, in the heavyweight division. But like you say, this is a big step up. And whilst I'm all in on Daniel Dubois, I think Joe Joyce is the sort that could potentially cause anyone problems. He's got such a high pace, high work rate, quite an awkward sort of style. So whatever happens, we're going to learn a lot about Daniel Dubois, and he's going to learn a lot about himself in this fight, I think. Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what we get from Dubois, because I think, you know, he's going to have to box a lot more than he's had to in previous fights. You know, he's obviously been able to sort of blow people away a lot. Whereas I think this one could come down to, you know, establishing the jab and, you know, really sort of controlling things, especially against someone, you know, who's going to keep coming at him like Joe Joyce. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think, you know, when Dubois fought Nathan Gorman, people were saying, that was sort of a bit of a step up, a bit of a, not quite 50-50, but that was meant to be a big test. And, you know, I was there that night and he absolutely blew Nathan Gorman away. So there's no doubt that, you know, Nathan Gorman was sort of going through a tough time at that point, we know now. And Joe Joyce is obviously a lot, superior to Nathan Gorman. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Dubois steps up again, how he copes with it. Because, like I say, I think he's got what it takes to be an absolutely huge star in the heavyweight division. I think he's got all the tools.
I think that's the big question, really, isn't it? It's not what we've necessarily seen from Dubois yet, as impressive as that has been, but what he's got left in the locker. And of course, after just a few fights, you do what you have to do to get through them. You don't necessarily have to unload, you know, show every tool in your armory, every weapon that you have. You simply deal with what's in front of you and move on to the next one. And so this is a question, really, of how much potential is still in Daniel Dubois. And at 23, you imagine there's plenty. Whereas with Joe Joyce, he's 35, as I say, but still had a short professional career after a long amateur career. But I do question how much there is in Joe Joyce that we haven't seen yet, given that he has fought the higher level opponent.
Yeah, it's like you say, it is going to be interesting to see that side of things. And I thought it was interesting as well. I think, well, obviously we hear a lot from Dubois about how he's like, you know, he's very, you know, he studies boxing. He's whole life is dedicated to boxing. And I thought it was interesting that there was a couple of years ago or a year or so ago, there was a piece he did that was talking about his just talking about his career and everything. And he was on about an amateur fight he lost early on, where he said that the guy he fought sort of wasn't better than him. He just kind of overawed him. He was just he was just on top of him constantly. And I think that's going to be the sort of thing we'll see from Joe Joyce. So I mean, obviously, I don't know much about this amateur fight, who it was, but it sounded like the sort of challenge that he might face against Joe Joyce with his sort of work rate. So it's going to be interesting to see how much he's learned from that. And yeah, interesting, I think, to see just how powerful he is as well against someone like Joe Joyce. Joyce isn't afraid, he's taken shots from some decent punches in the past. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see just how much power he's got, because it's easy to, we've seen it before, people that, blow fighters away with their power, and then when they step up to that next level, they've just not quite got that power. So, it's going to be, whatever happens tonight, we're going to have some questions answered, especially with Dubois.
It reminds me, this is probably completely ludicrous. Well, not ludicrous, but it might be off. But it reminds me of when Deontay Wilder was blowing everybody away, and then he fought Bermain Stavern for a world title, and it was the first time anyway, and it went the distance. Stavern, yeah, I think so, and it went the distance. And I think at that point it was okay. Maybe Deontay Wilder can't blow absolutely everybody away, but he was still, still good enough to comfortably win the fight. And I just, you do have Joe Joyce being the bigger man. I think he was a stone heavier. He's actually remarkably slightly taller, I think, as well. It's not the first time that Daniel Dubois fought someone who's bigger than Nathan Gorman was, but I think Joe Joyce's levels above him. So I think it's just so intriguing. I think Joe Joyce is definitely going to ask Daniel Dubois questions, and ultimately that's the whole point, isn't it? Is what can he answer those questions? And if he can answer those questions, then the sky's the limit. You talk about, he's 23, you talk about 10 years. If he wants to hang around for 10 years, that's 10 years for boxing fans, for boxing journalists to enjoy him. At a time when boxing heavyweights is already, the heavyweight scene is already thriving in Britain. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's been interesting as well with Frank Warren, who's obviously sort of worked with both of them, but he's all in on the Daniel Dubois side. Dubois obviously his man, and I think you've noticed that the last few years, like Frank Warren's sort of, he gets excited when he talks about Daniel Dubois. You can see that he's resting a lot of his hopes on Daniel Dubois. He thinks Daniel Dubois can be his next big sort of real big star. And obviously he works with Fury now, but he got Fury in his comeback and stuff like that. Whereas he's nurtured Daniel Dubois from the beginning, and you sense that Frank Warren's putting a lot of eggs in the Daniel Dubois basket. He thinks he's got what it takes to be his sort of real superstar. And like you say, if he can win tonight against Joe Joyce, it really puts him in such a good position. And as I think that's the thing with if Dubois does get the win, is that it's going to take, especially with the pandemic and the uncertainty, it's going to take a while for things to really shake out in the heavyweight division. Whereas, Dubois has got time on his side. He can afford to, if he beats Joe Joyce, he can afford to, have a couple more fights, keep learning, and sort of bide his time, waiting a little bit until, the Joshua Fury situation sort of irons itself out, because if they do fight, they're going to want a rematch. It's going to be a while until those two are sort of freed up, you sense. So the fact that Dubois is so young and he's got time on his side, it all just builds up nicely for the next sort of 5 years, I think, in the heavyweight division.
You mentioned Frank Warren, and I do feel like Joe Joyce has sort of been just left on the sidelines a little bit, because he is also represented by Frank, but very rarely talked about. And which I understand that Daniel Dubois has sort of been Frank's project. He's brought him through from being 17, 18, however old he was. But yeah, I feel like Joe Joyce has definitely been overlooked in this fight. Very few people picking him, which is fine. Maybe it will just be a convincing win for Daniel Dubois. And of course, we now have a farcical situation really tonight, where Joyce doesn't have Ismail Salas in his corner. Now, he of course is going to say he'll be fine without him. I'm sure he largely will. But again, Joe Joyce has never really been in trouble in a professional fight. And I know they've got Mark Tibbs. Not Jimmy. Mark, I think. So they've got some experience there, but it's not ideal to be going back to the corner, particularly if he's in trouble, and then not having the man who's guided you for most of your career there.
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky one. I think, as you say, he'll say that he'll be fine and all that sort of stuff, but I think it's the psychological impact of it. How much will it, how much doubt will, well, it's obviously a big thing to happen in fight week. It's a big sort of change. It's a big upheaval. It's how much is he going to be playing on his mind when he's sort of struggling through rounds or getting instructions. You know, it's not ideal at all. And I think that is, I really feel for Joe Joyce with that, to be honest, because it's obviously, as we said earlier, it's more, he's got a lot more to lose in this fight. You know, if Daniel Dubois loses, he's got time on his side to rebuild. For Joe Joyce, it's a massive night. It's sort of night that's going to define which direction his career goes from here. And you know, you want everything to be perfect, everything to be spot on. And it's it's a shame for him. I'm sure he'll sort of downplay it, and even if he loses, he'll make no excuses. But yeah, it's a shame for him. And I guess it's just the world we live in, really, with the COVID situation, isn't it? That these things can happen. I suppose it's better that it's better than it's a trainer than one of the fighters and the fight being called off again.
That's true. That would be a nightmare. I mean, I don't know. I know Ismail Salas went to Las Vegas in October to train his other fighters, which is fair enough. Obviously, he has multiple commitments. He doesn't live over here, so it's tricky. But I do wonder if I'm Joe Joyce, biggest fight of my life by a long way, I should be demanding, listen, no, you're with me for my whole camp. You know, I know the situation is as the situation is, but this is it. I've come back to you after going to Adam Booth, after going to Evo Sanchez. I want you, whenever I say jump, you say how high. That's what I would be saying. Yeah,
I agree. I do wonder, though, with you mentioned sort of Mark Tibbs, who obviously trained Dillian White. So, and he... I do wonder how much of I think he's stepping into the corner, and I wonder how much of a role he's had in the camp and with Joe Joyce, because I know that he's training Johnny Fisher, the new heavyweight with Matchroom, who I know has been sort of around the Joe Joyce camp and been training with Joe Joyce a lot. So I do wonder how much Mark Tibbs has sort of been around and been, there when Salas hasn't been there. And I'm putting two and two together, but I'm thinking that Mark Tibbs has probably been around the camp a fair bit, and he's obviously an experienced guy himself. But yeah, it does seem strange. I think even before Salas tested positive, there were sort of some questions about whether he was really giving everything that he could to the Joe Joyce cause and whether Joyce was getting everything out of him. I think their partnership sort of raised a few eyebrows even before Salas was going to be missing the fight. So, I mean, I suppose on one hand, now it's turned out like this. The fact that he hasn't had, Salas next to him the whole way probably limits the impact a little bit. But it's an interesting one. I think he's been with loads of different trainers, hasn't he, Joe Joyce? It's quite an interesting approach to things. He obviously thinks it's the best way for him, but I mean, if he wins tonight, you say spot on. If he loses, you start looking closer at those sort of things. I suppose it's just about what the result is.
Very true. And I accept that the most likely outcome of this fight, I think, is Daniel Dubois wins by stoppage. But I don't, I think people are sleeping a little bit on Joe Joyce. So I'm going to go with Joe Joyce just because I think he's going to cause Daniel problems he hasn't had before. He's going to smother a lot of his work. He's going to be, as you say, going to make him think a lot more with that fast-paced style of his. So I'm going to go with Joe Joyce just because, if I'm right, I can say I was right and everybody else is wrong. But no, I do think he's got much more of a chance than some people are giving him. But your final prediction?
Yeah, I think the value is definitely with Joe Joyce. If you were putting a bet on, you look at those odds. Sort of Dubois 1-4 is really short odds for the sort of fight this is, and I think Joe Joyce is definitely where the value is. But I think Joe Joyce might have some success early on, especially when he sort of smothers Dubois. But I think personally, Dubois got the boxing brain and the sort of the physical attributes to kind of work around that, fight his way out of it. I think Joyce will have some success early on, but I can see Dubois sort of coming on strong in the later rounds and winning on points or possibly getting the stoppage, I think.
Excellent. Well, the fight is on BT Sport 1 this evening from 7:30. We'll have full coverage, of course, at Mirror Fighting. I'll be back immediately after the fight to recap it and look ahead to what's next for both men. And you can also check out Rich and I talking about the other heavyweight fight in the early hours of Sunday morning, Mike Tyson against Roy Jones Jr. Please do, as I said, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and enjoy the fights.